My name is Jessica Martinez, and at 24 years old, I never imagined that being dismissed as just the babysitter would lead to the most shocking moment of my life. For 3 years, I'd been caring for my employer's grandchildren, while the family treated me like I was invisible. Then came the annual Blackwood family reunion, where I was expected to work while everyone else celebrated. What happened when Grandma Eleanor stood up to read her will in front of 50 family members changed everything. If you want to know how I went from being the hired help to owning half of a multi-million-dollar empire, stick around because this story will blow your mind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first time I met Eleanor Blackwood, she was sitting in her garden at the family estate in Maplewood Heights, Connecticut, feeding breadcrumbs to a family of ducks that had made their home in the ornamental pond. She looked up at me with the sharpest blue eyes I'd ever seen and said something that should have been my first clue about what was to come. "You have kind eyes, dear. That's rarer than people think in this family." I was 21 then, fresh out of college with a degree in early childhood education and desperately needing a job that would help me pay off my student loans. The Blackwood family had posted an ad for a live-in nanny to care for their grandchildren during summer visits and school breaks. The salary was generous enough to make me overlook the fact that the job description seemed to include being on call 24 hours a day. What I didn't realize was that I was walking into a family dynamic that would test every ounce of patience and dignity I possessed. The Blackwood estate sprawled across 15 acres of perfectly manicured lawns, with a main house that looked like something from a historical preservation society. Richard Blackwood, Eleanor's son, owned a chain of luxury hotels across the East Coast. His wife Patricia ran an interior design firm that catered to wealthy clients. Their son Marcus, 28, worked as the family business's vice president of operations, while their daughter Victoria, 25, had recently graduated from law school and was preparing for the bar exam. Then there were the grandchildren I was hired to care for. Marcus's twins, Sophie and Sam, both 6 years old, and Victoria's 4-year-old daughter Emma. From my first day on the job, the family's attitude toward me was crystal clear. I was staff, not a person worthy of basic courtesy. Patricia would leave detailed lists of instructions for the children's care, but never bothered to learn my name, referring to me as the girl when speaking to others. Richard treated me like a piece of furniture, walking past me in hallways as if I didn't exist. Marcus and Victoria were the worst, making snide comments about my background and education level whenever they thought I couldn't hear. The only family member who treated me with genuine warmth was Eleanor, the 82-year-old matriarch who had built the family fortune alongside her late husband Charles. She would invite me to join her for afternoon tea in the solarium, asking about my studies, my family, and my dreams for the future. She remembered details about my life that her own children never bothered to learn, like the fact that I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, or that I sent half my salary home to help my single mother in Phoenix. During those tea sessions, Eleanor would share stories about her life, her struggles as a young woman starting a business in the 1960s, and her disappointment in how entitled her children had become. She told me about the early days when she and Charles had worked 18-hour days to build their first hotel from the ground up, sleeping in a tiny apartment above the lobby and cleaning rooms themselves when staff called in sick. Those conversations felt like glimpses into a different world, one where success came through determination rather than inheritance. The children adored me, which only seemed to irritate their parents more. Sophie and Sam would run to me when they scraped their knees, and Emma insisted that I read her bedtime stories every night. I helped them with art projects, took them on nature walks around the property, and taught them simple Spanish phrases that delighted Eleanor but earned disapproving looks from Patricia. When Marcus complained that I was teaching his children unnecessary foreign languages, I bit my tongue and continued anyway, knowing that Eleanor supported my methods. The tension came to a head during my second summer with the family. Victoria had married a pretentious investment banker named Trevor, and they were expecting their second child. The stress of pregnancy made Victoria even more demanding and cruel than usual. She began nitpicking everything I did, from the way I folded the children's clothes to the games I played with them in the backyard. One afternoon, she screamed at me for 20 minutes because I had allowed Emma to get her dress dirty while we were gardening with Eleanor. That evening, Eleanor knocked on my door in the staff quarters, something she had never done before. She sat on my small sofa and looked around the sparse room with sad eyes. "This is no way for someone to live who brings such joy to this house," she said quietly. "I want you to know that your kindness hasn't gone unnoticed, Jessica. Not by me, and not by the children who love you." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I've been thinking about the future quite a bit lately, about what kind of legacy I want to leave behind." I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but looking back, I realized that conversation was Eleanor's way of preparing me for what was to come. She began spending even more time with me, taking long walks around the property and pointing out details about the grounds, the buildings, and the family business that seemed oddly specific. She showed me the original blueprints for the estate, explained the significance of various antiques and art pieces, and even brought me to several board meetings for the hotel chain, introducing me as her special assistant. The family's treatment of me reached a new low during my 3rd year with them. Patricia had decided to redecorate the children's playroom and hired expensive designers without consulting me about the children's needs or preferences. When I suggested that the new furniture seemed impractical for young children, she exploded. "I don't recall asking for input from the help," she snapped in front of the entire family during dinner. "Your job is to supervise the children, not to have opinions about our family decisions." Eleanor's face darkened at her daughter-in-law's words, but she said nothing in the moment. Later that evening, she called me to her private study, a room I had only entered a handful of times. The walls were lined with leather-bound books, family photos, and business awards spanning decades. She poured herself a glass of sherry and offered me one, which I politely declined. "Jessica," she said, settling into her favorite armchair, "I need to ask you something important. Do you trust me?" The question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly. "Of course, Mrs. Blackwood. You've been nothing but kind to me." She nodded slowly, as if my response confirmed something she had been wondering about. "Good, because I'm going to need you to be strong in the coming months. My family can be difficult when they don't get what they expect." She walked to her desk and retrieved a thick envelope with my name written on it in her elegant handwriting. "Don't open this yet," she instructed, "but keep it safe. You'll know when the time is right." I tucked the envelope into my jacket pocket, mystified by her cryptic words but trusting her completely. Eleanor had become more than just my employer. She was a mentor, a confidant, and the closest thing to a grandmother I'd ever known. My own grandparents had died when I was young, and my mother's family was scattered across the country. The bond I shared with Eleanor filled a void I hadn't even realized existed.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The next few months brought subtle changes to the household dynamic. Eleanor began having more frequent meetings with lawyers and financial advisors, always requesting that I bring tea to these sessions. During these visits, I noticed how the attorneys treated her with enormous respect, hanging on her every word as she made decisions about various business matters. It was clear that despite her advanced age, Eleanor's mind remained razor-sharp, and her influence over the family empire was absolute. Richard and Patricia seemed increasingly anxious about these meetings, often hovering outside Eleanor's study and trying to eavesdrop on conversations. Victoria and Marcus began visiting more frequently, always with their children in tow, making elaborate shows of family togetherness that felt forced and artificial. During these visits, they would barely acknowledge my presence while loudly discussing their career achievements and future plans within earshot of their grandmother. The announcement of the annual Blackwood family reunion came in late spring, accompanied by Eleanor's declaration that this year would be extra special. The event was always held at the estate over the 4th of July weekend, bringing together distant relatives, family friends, and business associates for 3 days of festivities. As usual, I was expected to work throughout the weekend, managing the children while the adults socialized and celebrated their family legacy. This year felt different from the moment guests began arriving. Eleanor seemed more energetic than I had seen her in months, greeting relatives with unusual enthusiasm and making mysterious comments about having Important news to share. She had arranged for a formal dinner on Saturday evening, complete with a professional catering staff and elaborate decorations throughout the main house. When I offered to help with preparations, she insisted that I focus solely on the children and leave the event planning to others. Friday evening's casual barbecue proceeded as expected, with me chasing the children around the backyard while the adults mingled and caught up on family news. I overheard several conversations about Eleanor's health, with various relatives speculating about her estate planning and expressing concern about her advanced age. Richard and Patricia held court near the pool, entertaining guests with stories about their latest business ventures and vacation travels. Marcus and Victoria worked the crowd like political candidates, making sure every important relative knew about their professional accomplishments. Saturday morning brought the traditional family photo session, an elaborate affair that required multiple outfit changes and hours of posing for the professional photographer Eleanor hired every year. As always, I was relegated to the background, helping wrangle the children between shots and staying out of frame. When little Emma asked why I couldn't be in the pictures with the rest of the family, Patricia quickly explained that Miss Jessica has her own family somewhere else, in a tone that made it clear the topic was not open for discussion. The afternoon passed with various activities scattered around the property. Some relatives played tennis on the private court, others enjoyed boat rides on the nearby lake, and the children participated in games and crafts that I had organized in the garden pavilion. Eleanor moved through the gatherings like a queen holding court, spending time with each group of relatives and accepting their tributes and well wishes with gracious smiles. As evening approached and guests prepared for the formal dinner, Eleanor asked me to bring the children to her private sitting room for what she called a special conversation. The three little ones gathered around her chair while she spoke to them in gentle tones about love, family, and the importance of treating all people with kindness. She hugged each child longer than usual and asked me to take extra good care of them, a request that seemed oddly emotional for such a simple task. The formal dinner was an impressive affair, with the main dining room decorated in elegant silver and blue, Eleanor's favorite colors. The extended family filled 3 long tables, with Eleanor seated at the head of the main table surrounded by her children and their spouses. I sat with the children at a smaller table in the adjacent room, close enough to supervise them but far enough away to reinforce my status as hired help rather than family. After the main course, Eleanor stood and tapped her crystal glass with a silver spoon, calling for attention. The entire room fell silent as she began to speak, her voice carrying clearly despite her age. "My dear family and friends," she began, "this gathering holds special significance for me. At my age, one never knows how many more opportunities there will be to see everyone together in this house that Charles and I built with our own hands." A murmur of emotion rippled through the room as relatives dabbed at their eyes and nodded solemnly. Eleanor continued, "I have spent considerable time recently reflecting on my legacy, not just the financial aspects, but the values and principles I hope to pass down to future generations." She paused, scanning the faces around the tables before her gaze settled on me for just a moment. "Which brings me to an important announcement I need to make this evening." Richard leaned forward in his chair, his face showing a mixture of anticipation and concern. Patricia gripped her wine glass tightly, while Marcus and Victoria exchanged meaningful glances across the table. The extended family waited in respectful silence, clearly expecting some kind of succession planning announcement, or perhaps news about Eleanor's health. "I have recently updated my will," Eleanor announced, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And I believe this is the appropriate time and place to share some of its contents with all of you." The tension in the room became palpable as relatives shifted in their seats and focused intently on the elderly matriarch. Eleanor reached into her handbag and withdrew a thick document, unfolding it carefully as she prepared to continue. The Blackwood family business, including all hotel properties, investments, and assets, will continue to operate under the guidance of those who have shown true dedication to our values. She looked directly at Richard, who visibly relaxed, assuming this meant the inheritance would follow traditional lines. "However," Eleanor continued, her voice taking on a steel edge that made everyone sit up straighter, "I have made some significant changes regarding the distribution of my personal estate." The room held its collective breath as Eleanor scanned the document in her hands. To my son Richard and his wife Patricia, I leave the sum of $1 million and the vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, with the hope that you will use this time for reflection on what truly matters in life." Richard's face went white as he processed the relatively modest bequest, clearly expecting much more from his mother's vast personal fortune. Eleanor continued reading without acknowledging the shocked expressions spreading across the room. "To my grandson Marcus and his wife Jennifer, I leave the sum of $1 million and the collection of Charles's vintage automobiles, trusting that you will appreciate their historical significance." Marcus's jaw dropped as he realized his inheritance was far smaller than anticipated, and several relatives began whispering among themselves. "To my granddaughter Victoria and her husband Trevor, I leave the sum of $1 million and my collection of jewelry, excluding the pieces that hold special significance to me personally." Victoria's face flushed red as she struggled to maintain composure, clearly devastated by what she perceived as a shocking slight from her grandmother. The whispers grew louder as relatives tried to calculate the enormous gap between these bequests and Eleanor's known wealth. If she was giving away relatively small amounts to her immediate family, where was the rest of the fortune going? Eleanor seemed to enjoy the suspense, taking a slow sip of water before continuing with the most shocking revelation of all. "The remainder of my personal estate, including this house, the surrounding property, my art collection, my investment portfolio, and all other assets not previously mentioned, I leave to Jessica Martinez." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Patricia's wineglass hitting the table as her hand went limp with shock. Every eye in the room turned to look at me, sitting with the children in the adjacent room, my own face surely reflecting the complete bewilderment I felt. Eleanor's announcement seemed impossible, surreal, like something from a dream rather than reality. The family members I had served for 3 years stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility, as if I had somehow orchestrated this unexpected turn of events. Richard was the first to find his voice, standing abruptly and addressing his mother with barely controlled anger. "This is insane, Mother. You can't possibly mean to leave the family estate to a stranger, to someone who has no connection to our family or our history." His face had turned an alarming shade of purple as he struggled to process what he had just heard. Eleanor remained perfectly calm, folding the will and placing it back in her handbag with deliberate care. "Jessica is not a stranger, Richard. She has lived in this house for 3 years, caring for your grandchildren with more devotion than I have seen from their own parents. She has shown me more respect and genuine affection than any of you have bothered to display in recent years." Patricia found her voice next, her tone shrill with indignation. "This is ridiculous, Eleanor. The girl is an employee, nothing more. You've obviously been manipulated by someone who saw an opportunity to take advantage of an elderly woman." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation as dozens of relatives stared at me with suspicion. Victoria stood up so quickly her chair toppled backward, her voice rising to nearly a shout. "Grandmother, this is a mistake. You can't leave our family's legacy to some babysitter who probably doesn't even understand the value of what you're giving her." The cruelty in her words cut deep, reducing my 3 years of dedication to the family to nothing more than casual childcare. Eleanor's eyes flashed with anger as she surveyed her family's reactions. "Jessica understands value better than any of you," she said firmly. "She understands the value of kindness, of hard work, of treating every person with dignity regardless of their social status. These are the qualities Charles and I built this family's success upon, and these are the qualities I want to preserve for future generations." Marcus jumped into the fray, his business training evident in his attempt to approach the situation logically. "Grandmother, even if you have some sentimental attachment to Jessica, surely you can see that leaving the estate to someone outside the family is irresponsible. She has no experience managing wealth of this magnitude. The practical implications alone should make you reconsider this decision." The children, sensing the tension but not understanding its source, had grown quiet and were looking to me for reassurance. I gathered them closer, trying to shield them from the ugly scene unfolding around us while my mind reeled from Eleanor's shocking announcement. The envelope she had given me months earlier suddenly felt heavy in my pocket, and I wondered if it contained some explanation for this unimaginable turn of events. Eleanor stood slowly, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of the entire room, despite the chaos erupting around her. "I have made my decision with full awareness of its implications," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This will was prepared with the assistance of the finest legal minds in the state, and I am of completely sound mind and body, as recent medical evaluations will attest." She walked slowly around the table, her gaze settling on each family member in turn. "For 3 years, I have watched Jessica bring joy and stability to this household, while the rest of you treated her as if she were invisible. I have seen her sacrifice her own comfort to ensure my great-grandchildren felt loved and secure. I have observed her send half her salary to support her own mother, while never asking for anything beyond common courtesy in return." The extended family members who had been silent throughout the confrontation began to shift uncomfortably, clearly torn between loyalty to Richard's branch of the family and their growing awareness that Eleanor's criticism might be justified. Several elderly relatives nodded approvingly as Eleanor continued her explanation, apparently having witnessed the family's poor treatment of me during previous gatherings. Eleanor's voice grew stronger as she reached the climax of her speech. "Jessica represents everything I had hoped my own family would become: humble, hardworking, generous, and kind. Instead, I have watched my children and grandchildren grow entitled, dismissive of others, and focused solely on their own advancement. The fortune Charles and I built was meant to enable good works and strengthen family bonds, not to create arrogant individuals who look down on those less fortunate." Richard attempted one final desperate argument, his voice pleading now rather than angry. "Mother, please think about what you're doing. This estate has been in our family for generations. You're destroying our children's birthright, their connection to their heritage. Surely there's a way to provide for Jessica without disinheriting your own blood." Eleanor turned to face her son with an expression of profound sadness mixed with resolve. "I am not destroying their heritage, Richard. I am trying to save it. The true Blackwood legacy is not ownership of property or accumulation of wealth. It is the principle that every person deserves respect, and that those blessed with abundance have a responsibility to lift others up." She walked over to where I sat with the children, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Jessica has already proven herself worthy of this trust. She has cared for these children as if they were her own, treated me with the respect of a beloved grandmother, and maintained her dignity despite years of condescension from people who should have welcomed her as part of our family." The room erupted in angry voices as relatives began arguing among themselves about the validity of Eleanor's decision, the potential for legal challenges, and the implications for the family's social standing. Through it all, Eleanor remained calm, her hand still resting on my shoulder as an anchor of stability in the storm of chaos surrounding us. As the evening dissolved into recriminations and threats, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. In a single moment, my entire life had been transformed from that of a struggling nanny to the inheritor of a vast fortune. Yet rather than feeling joy or excitement, I felt overwhelmed by the weight of Eleanor's trust and the hostility now radiating from people I had served faithfully for 3 years. The children, frightened by the shouting and confusion, pressed closer to me for comfort, their innocent eyes wide with worry about the angry adults surrounding us. In that moment, holding those 3 little ones close while chaos erupted around us, I understood exactly why Eleanor had made her extraordinary decision. She had recognized something in me that her own family had failed to see, and now she was entrusting me with both her legacy and her beloved great-grandchildren's future well-being. The confrontation continued long into the night, with family members breaking into heated arguments while Eleanor retired to her private quarters, leaving me to face the fury of her newly disinherited relatives. Patricia cornered me in the kitchen as I tried to prepare warm milk for the children, who were too upset by the evening's events to sleep. Her face was twisted with rage as she grabbed my arm with surprising force. for someone who spent most of her time at country club luncheons. "You manipulative little witch," she hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. "I don't know how you did it, but you've poisoned that old woman's mind against her own family. This won't stand, Jessica. We'll fight this will with everything we have, and when we're done, you'll be lucky to get a job cleaning hotel rooms." Her words stung, but what hurt more was the realization that 3 years of caring for her grandchildren meant nothing to her now that her inheritance was threatened. Richard appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from the evening's stress. "Patricia, leave her alone for now," he said, though his tone held no kindness toward me. "We need to focus on legal strategies, not emotional outbursts." He fixed me with a cold stare that made me shiver. "Jessica, I hope you understand that this family will never accept you as anything more than hired help, regardless of what my mother's confused will might say." The children had finally fallen asleep in the guest room I had prepared for them, exhausted by the tension they couldn't fully comprehend. I sat in the hallway outside their door, my back against the wall, still struggling to process the evening's revelations. The envelope Eleanor had given me months earlier felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket, but something told me this wasn't the right moment to open it. Marcus and Victoria found me there an hour later, their earlier shock having transformed into calculated determination. Victoria, with her legal training, had clearly been formulating a strategy to contest their grandmother's will. "We need to talk," she said, settling onto the floor across from me with the kind of false friendliness that made my skin crawl. Marcus remained standing, his arms crossed as he assumed what I recognized as his intimidation pose from business meetings. "Look, Jessica," Victoria began, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she might use with a difficult client. "We all know grandmother has been struggling with some confusion lately, memory issues, moments of disorientation. We've been worried about her for months but didn't want to embarrass her by making it public." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that I almost admired her audacity. Marcus nodded in support of his sister's fabrication. "The family has documentation of these incidents, Jessica. Medical professionals who can testify about her declining mental state. If this goes to court, which it will, her capacity to make sound decisions will be thoroughly questioned." He leaned down slightly, trying to use his height advantage to make his point more intimidating. "But it doesn't have to come to that." Victoria smiled the way a shark might smile before attacking. "We're prepared to offer you a very generous settlement. $500,000, cash, no questions asked. That's more money than you could earn in 20 years of babysitting. And it's yours immediately if you simply agree to renounce any claim to grandmother's estate." She paused, watching my face for any sign of temptation. "Think about it, Jessica. You could pay off your student loans, help your mother, start any kind of life you want." The offer was substantial, more money than I had ever imagined having, but something about their desperate eagerness to buy me off made me suspicious. If Eleanor's will was as legally questionable as they claimed, why were they so anxious to prevent it from going to probate? Their willingness to offer such a large sum suggested they weren't as confident about their chances in court as they pretended to be. "I need time to think," I said finally, which was true. The entire situation felt surreal, and I needed space to process what was happening before making any decisions that would affect the rest of my life. Marcus's face darkened at my response, clearly having expected me to jump at their generous offer. "Don't take too long," he warned. "This offer won't be available indefinitely, and the alternative will be a very public, very ugly legal battle that will destroy your reputation and leave you with nothing but massive legal bills." With that pleasant threat, he and Victoria left me alone in the hallway, their footsteps echoing down the marble corridor as they went to rejoin their parents. The next morning brought a parade of departing relatives, most of whom couldn't meet my eyes as they said their goodbyes to Eleanor. The elderly matriarch appeared refreshed and energetic, despite the previous evening's drama, greeting her departing guests with the same gracious warmth she had always shown. Several of the older relatives made a point of hugging me goodbye and whispering words of encouragement, clearly having formed their own opinions about the family dynamics they had witnessed. Eleanor's sister Margaret, a formidable woman in her 70s who had built her own successful real estate empire, lingered after the other guests had left. I overheard her heated conversation with Richard in the garden, her voice carrying clearly through the open windows. "You've brought this on yourself, Richard," she declared bluntly. "I've watched you and your children treat that girl like dirt for years, and now you're surprised that your mother chose someone who actually showed her love and respect?" Richard's defensive response was predictable. "Mother is not thinking clearly, Margaret. She's making decisions based on sentiment rather than logic. Jessica is a nice enough girl, but she has no business inheriting a family fortune." Margaret's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Your mother's mind is sharper than yours ever was, Richard. Maybe if you had spent less time planning how to spend her money and more time actually caring about her well-being, things would be different." Patricia emerged from the house at that moment, clearly having been eavesdropping on the conversation. "Margaret, you don't understand the full situation," she began, but Eleanor's sister cut her off with a wave of her hand. "I understand perfectly, Patricia. I understand that you've been counting Eleanor's money for years, while treating her caregiver like a servant. I understand that your children have shown more interest in their inheritance than in their grandmother's happiness." The confrontation ended with Margaret's firm declaration that she would support Eleanor's decision completely, including providing testimony about her sister's mental acuity if necessary. As she prepared to leave, she sought me out in the children's playroom where I was helping them process their confusion about the previous evening's events. "Jessica, dear," Margaret said, settling into one of the small chairs with surprising grace for her age, "I want you to know that what happened last night was long overdue. Eleanor has been planning this for months, and she chose you because she sees something special in you." She reached into her purse and withdrew a business card. "This is my attorney, David Chen. He's one of the finest estate lawyers in New England, and he's already been briefed on your situation. Call him tomorrow." The children were unusually clingy that day, sensing the tension in the house and worried about the changes they couldn't fully understand. Sophie asked me repeatedly if I was going to leave them, while Sam built elaborate block towers only to knock them down in apparent frustration. Emma refused to let go of my hand during lunch, her big eyes filled with tears she couldn't explain. Eleanor found us in the garden that afternoon, where I was trying to distract the children with their favorite outdoor games. She sat on her favorite bench and watched us play for several minutes before asking the children to help her feed the ducks by the pond. As they ran ahead with chunks of bread, she turned to me with a serious expression. "I know yesterday was overwhelming for you, Jessica," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "I also know my family has been pressuring you to renounce the inheritance. Before you make any decisions, I need you to read the letter I gave you months ago. Everything will make more sense once you understand my reasoning." I pulled the envelope from my pocket, where it had remained since the previous evening, and carefully opened it. Eleanor's elegant handwriting filled several pages, and as I read, tears began streaming down my face. The letter explained everything: her growing disappointment in her children's behavior, her recognition of my genuine character, and her detailed plans for how the inheritance should be used to benefit others. "My dear Jessica," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then my family has learned about my decision to entrust you with the majority of my estate. I imagine they are shocked, angry, and possibly threatening legal action. This does not surprise me, as their behavior over the past few years has only confirmed my belief that they are not the right guardians for the legacy Charles and I built together." The letter went on to detail specific incidents Eleanor had witnessed: Richard's dismissive treatment of service staff at family events, Patricia's cruel comments about people they considered beneath their social status, Marcus's unethical business practices that had come to her attention, and Victoria's calculated coldness toward anyone who couldn't advance her career. In contrast, Eleanor had written, "I have watched you bring light and love into this house every single day. You have cared for my great-grandchildren with genuine devotion, treated me with the respect and affection I remember from my own children when they were young, and maintained your dignity despite treatment that would have driven many people away." The most shocking part of the letter revealed Eleanor's long-term planning. She had been quietly preparing for this moment for over a year, consulting with financial advisors and attorneys to ensure the inheritance would be structured in a way that would benefit both me and various charitable causes. The letter included detailed instructions for establishing a foundation to help other young women from disadvantaged backgrounds pursue education and career opportunities. "The money is not a gift, Jessica," the letter concluded. "It is a responsibility. I am trusting you to use these resources to make the world a better place, something I fear my own family has forgotten how to do. You have already proven yourself worthy of this trust through your actions over the past 3 years. Now I am asking you to prove it to the world." Eleanor watched my face as I finished reading, her blue eyes twinkling with satisfaction at my emotional response. "Now you understand," she said softly. "This inheritance comes with obligations, Jessica. I'm not just giving you money. I'm giving you the opportunity to continue the work Charles and I started, helping others achieve their dreams despite difficult circumstances." The weight of her expectations both thrilled and terrified me. The money would solve every financial problem I had ever faced. But Eleanor was asking for much more than that. She wanted me to become a steward of her values, using her fortune to help others the way she and Charles had helped countless people throughout their lives. That evening, as the house finally settled into quiet after the chaos of the reunion weekend, I called my mother in Phoenix to tell her about the incredible turn my life had taken. Maria Martinez had worked 3 jobs for most of my childhood, sacrificing her own opportunities to ensure I could pursue my education. Her reaction to the news was everything I had hoped for and more. "Mija," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "this woman saw what I have always seen in you. You have the biggest heart of anyone I know, and now you have the resources to help others the way you've always wanted to." She paused, and I could hear her crying softly. "Your father would be so proud of you right now. He always said you were meant for something special." The conversation with my mother strengthened my resolve to honor Eleanor's trust, regardless of the challenges ahead. The next morning, I called David Chen, the attorney Margaret had recommended, and scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. His offices in downtown Hartford were impressive, occupying the top floor of a gleaming skyscraper with panoramic views of the Connecticut River. David Chen turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and an immediate understanding of the complexities surrounding my situation. He had already reviewed Eleanor's will and confirmed that it was legally bulletproof, drafted with every possible challenge in mind. "Mrs. Blackwood is one of the sharpest people I've ever met," he assured me. "She anticipated every argument her family might make and took steps to neutralize them." He explained that Eleanor had undergone comprehensive medical evaluations from multiple physicians in the months leading up to updating her will, all of whom had certified her mental competency. She had also created detailed video recordings explaining her reasoning for the inheritance decisions, recordings that would be powerful evidence in any legal proceeding. "The family's best strategy will be to try to settle out of court," David explained. "A public trial would expose their treatment of you and their grandmother, which wouldn't reflect well on their business reputations. They're likely hoping to intimidate you into accepting a smaller settlement rather than fighting for your full inheritance." I told him about Marcus and Victoria's offer of $500,000, which made him laugh. "That confirms my assessment," he said. "If they truly believed they could win in court, they wouldn't be offering you anything. The fact that they're willing to part with $500,000 shows they're worried about their chances." David outlined the process ahead, warning me that the family would likely escalate their pressure tactics as they realized I wasn't going to be easily bought off. He recommended that I move out of the Blackwood estate temporarily, both for my own safety and to avoid any appearance of impropriety while the will was being probated. The suggestion of leaving the estate filled me with sadness, not just because it had been my home for 3 years, but because it would mean being separated from the children I had grown to love. Eleanor, however, supported David's recommendation when I discussed it with her that evening. "It's only temporary, dear," she assured me. "Once everything is settled, you'll be back home where you belong." She had already arranged for me to stay in a furnished apartment downtown, close to David's offices and far enough from the estate to provide some distance from the family's hostility. The children were devastated when I explained that I would be leaving for a little while, though I tried to reassure them that it wasn't permanent and had nothing to do with my feelings for them. Sophie clung to me as I packed my belongings, her 6-year-old mind struggling to understand why another important person in her life was going away. "Will you come back and read me stories?" she asked, her lower lip trembling with the effort not to cry. I promised her that I would return as soon as possible, though I wasn't entirely certain I was telling the truth. My last evening at the estate was bittersweet, filled with memories of the life I had built there and uncertainty about what lay ahead. Eleanor and I had dinner together in her private dining room, a small, intimate space where we had shared countless conversations over the past 3 years. She seemed smaller and more fragile than usual, as if the weekend's stress had finally caught up with her. "I need you to promise me something, Jessica," she said as we finished our meal. "No matter how difficult things become in the coming weeks, don't let my family convince you that you don't deserve this inheritance. You've earned it through 3 years of dedication and kindness, and you'll honor it in ways they never could." I promised her I would remember her words, though I couldn't shake the feeling that this might be our last quiet dinner together. Eleanor seemed to sense my concerns, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand with surprising strength. "You're stronger than you know, dear girl. Charles and I didn't build our fortune by backing down from challenges, and neither will you." The next morning, I moved into the downtown apartment Eleanor had arranged, a cozy space with large windows overlooking a tree-lined street. The furniture was comfortable and welcoming, clearly chosen by someone who understood my preferences after years of observation. A bouquet of fresh flowers sat on the kitchen table with a note from Eleanor. "Welcome to your new beginning." Within hours of my departure from the estate, the family's legal offensive began in earnest. David Chen called to inform me that the Blackwood family had retained Vincent Morrison, one of the most aggressive estate attorneys in Connecticut, known for his willingness to use underhanded tactics to achieve his clients' goals. Morrison had already filed preliminary motions challenging Eleanor's mental competency and requesting an expedited hearing. "Morrison is exactly what I expected," David said during our emergency meeting that afternoon. "He's going to try to overwhelm us with paperwork and depositions, hoping to exhaust your resources and resolve before we can mount a proper defense. The good news is that Mrs. Blackwood anticipated this strategy and has already established a legal defense fund to cover all your expenses." The revelation that Eleanor had planned even for my legal costs brought tears to my eyes. She had thought of everything, from my immediate housing needs to the long-term battle that lay ahead. Her foresight and generosity reinforced my determination to prove worthy of her trust, regardless of the challenges the Blackwood family might throw at me. The first volley in the legal war came in the form of a private investigator who appeared at my apartment building, asking neighbors questions about my background and character. David had warned me this would happen, but it was still unsettling to realize that my entire life was being scrutinized by people looking for ammunition to use against me. Morrison's strategy became clear over the next few days, as a parade of process servers delivered subpoenas, demanding access to my financial records, medical history, academic transcripts, and employment records, going back to my teenage years. The invasion of privacy was overwhelming, but David assured me it was standard intimidation tactics designed to make me feel vulnerable and isolated. "They're fishing for anything they can use to paint you as unstable, untrustworthy, or manipulative," he explained as we reviewed the mounting stack of legal documents. "The fact that they're casting such a wide net suggests they haven't found anything substantial in their initial investigation." Eleanor called me every evening during this period, her voice providing comfort and strength when the pressure felt overwhelming. She seemed remarkably calm for someone whose family was essentially waging war against her final wishes, but then again, she had been preparing for this battle far longer than any of us had realized. "How are you holding up, dear?" she asked during one of these calls, her concern evident despite her own stressful situation. I admitted that the constant legal harassment was taking its toll, making me second-guess whether I was strong enough to see this through to the end. "Strength isn't about feeling confident all the time, Jessica," Eleanor said gently. "It's about doing what's right even when you're scared. Charles used to say that the measure of a person's character isn't how they behave when things are easy, but how they respond when everything seems impossible." Her words reminded me of why she had chosen me in the first place. This inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about proving that her values could survive in a world that often seemed to reward greed and selfishness over kindness and integrity. If I gave up now, I wouldn't just be failing myself, I would be failing everyone. Eleanor hoped to help through the foundation we planned to establish. The turning point came when Morrison made a critical error in his aggressive strategy. In his eagerness to discredit me, he arranged for a psychological evaluation that he clearly expected would support his claims about my mental instability or manipulative tendencies. The evaluation, conducted by Dr. Sarah Williams, a respected forensic psychologist, took place over 2 full days and included extensive interviews, cognitive testing, and personality assessments. Dr. Williams' report, when it arrived a week later, was everything Morrison hadn't hoped for. She described me as emotionally stable, highly intelligent, and possessed of unusual empathy and integrity for someone her age. The report went on to note that my responses during testing showed no evidence of manipulative tendencies, personality disorders, or psychological instability. Most damaging to Morrison's case was Dr. Williams' observation that my emotional responses during the evaluation were consistent with someone who has been genuinely caring for children and elderly individuals, rather than someone who has been calculating financial advantage. She concluded that this is what happens when attorneys get overconfident, he explained with barely contained glee. Morrison was so certain you would test as unstable or manipulative that he didn't prepare for the possibility that you're exactly what you appear to be, a genuinely good person. The psychological evaluation marked the beginning of Morrison's retreat from his most aggressive tactics. Over the next few weeks, his tone in legal communications became noticeably less confrontational, suggesting that the Blackwood family was beginning to realize their legal position wasn't as strong as they had initially believed. Eleanor seemed to take particular satisfaction in this development when I shared it with her during one of our evening calls. "I told you that you were stronger than you knew," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Morrison built his reputation on intimidating people who don't have the resources to fight back. He wasn't prepared to face someone with both the moral conviction and legal support to stand up to his bullying. As the initial legal skirmishes settled into a more predictable pattern, I began to understand that this battle would be won not through dramatic courtroom confrontations, but through the steady accumulation of evidence supporting Eleanor's decision. Every day that passed without Morrison finding genuine evidence of misconduct strengthened our position and weakened theirs. The children had been asking about me constantly, according to Eleanor, who made sure to pass along their messages during our phone calls. Sophie had drawn me a picture of our garden adventures, Sam had built a block castle he wanted to show me, and Emma asked every night when I would be coming home to read her bedtime stories. Their innocent questions apparently created significant tension within the household, as the family struggled to explain my absence without admitting their role in driving me away. Eleanor reported that Patricia had been telling the children I was on vacation, while Richard claimed I was visiting my own family. The contradictory explanations had left the children confused and upset, adding another layer of stress to an already volatile household. 3 weeks after moving into the downtown apartment, I received an unexpected visitor. Margaret, Eleanor's sister, appeared at my door with a grocery bag full of homemade cookies and a thermos of coffee, announcing that she had come for a proper visit. Her warmth and directness were exactly what I needed after weeks of legal stress and isolation. "I wanted to see how you're holding up under the family's assault," she said, settling into my small living room with the ease of someone comfortable anywhere. "Eleanor is worried about you, though she's too proud to admit it. She's afraid that Richard and his brood might succeed in wearing you down through sheer persistence." Margaret's visit provided perspective I desperately needed. She shared stories about Eleanor and Charles's early struggles, their gradual success, and their growing disappointment in their children's sense of entitlement. "Your generation gives me hope," she said as we finished the coffee. "You understand that money is a tool, not a goal. Eleanor saw that in you from the beginning." As autumn deepened and the legal proceedings continued their slow pace, I settled into a routine that balanced preparation for depositions and meetings with David against volunteer work at a local community center. The volunteer position, working with children from low-income families, reminded me daily of why Eleanor's vision for the foundation was so important. Working with these children, many of whom faced challenges I recognized from my own childhood, reinforced my determination to honor Eleanor's trust. Every child who struggled with homework because their parents worked multiple jobs, every teenager who dreamed of college but couldn't afford application fees, every family that chose between groceries and school supplies represented the people Eleanor wanted to help. The Blackwood family's legal team seemed to recognize that their intimidation tactics weren't working, because Morrison's approach shifted toward attempting to negotiate a larger settlement. The offers increased from the initial $500,000 to $1 million, then $2 million, accompanied by increasingly urgent warnings about the costs and uncertainty of continued litigation. Each escalating offer only confirmed what David had suspected from the beginning. The family knew they were unlikely to win in court and were desperately trying to minimize their losses. Their willingness to offer millions of dollars to make me go away proved that Eleanor's estate was worth far more than they wanted me to know. As winter approached, bringing with it the prospect of spending the holidays away from the children I had grown to love, I found myself questioning whether the emotional cost of this battle was worth the potential reward. The loneliness was overwhelming at times, despite Eleanor's daily calls and David's constant reassurance about our legal prospects. It was during one of these low moments that Eleanor surprised me with an unexpected proposal. She had arranged for me to visit the estate for an afternoon, ostensibly to retrieve some personal items I had forgotten, but really to spend time with the children who missed me desperately. The visit would have to be brief and supervised, but it would give me a chance to reassure the children that I hadn't abandoned them. The reunion with Sophie, Sam, and Emma was everything I had hoped for and more. They surrounded me the moment I walked through the door, chattering excitedly about everything that had happened since I left. Their joy at seeing me was infectious, lifting my spirits in a way that weeks of legal victories hadn't managed to achieve. As I prepared to leave after our short visit, Sophie grabbed my hand and looked up at me with serious 6-year-old eyes. "Jessica, are you going to be our nanny forever?" she asked. The question cut straight to my heart, because I realized that regardless of the inheritance battle's outcome, my relationship with these children would never be the same. Eleanor walked me to my car, her face reflecting the same sadness I felt about the artificial separation that had been imposed on our family. "This will be over soon," she promised, though we both knew that even victory in court wouldn't restore the simple happiness we had shared before the will reading changed everything. As I drove back to my downtown apartment, I understood that the real battle wasn't just about money or legal rights. It was about preserving the love and connection that had made the Blackwood estate feel like home, despite the hostility of its other inhabitants. Eleanor's inheritance was meaningless if it came at the cost of losing the children who had given my life its deepest purpose. The breakthrough came on a frigid February morning when David called with news that would change everything. Morrison had made a fatal miscalculation in his desperation to find ammunition against me. In his aggressive investigation, he had hired a private detective who crossed several legal lines, including attempting to bribe former employers and accessing confidential university records without proper authorization. Morrison's investigator got caught red-handed trying to pay off your college roommate for negative stories about you, David explained, his voice barely containing his excitement. When she refused and reported the incident to local police, it triggered an investigation that uncovered a pattern of illegal surveillance and harassment. Morrison could face serious sanctions from the Bar Association. The illegal tactics had backfired spectacularly, not only undermining Morrison's credibility, but also generating sympathy for my position among legal professionals following the case. More importantly, the investigators' desperate measures suggested that months of scrutiny had failed to uncover any legitimate evidence against me, further strengthening our argument that Eleanor's decision was based on sound judgment rather than manipulation. Eleanor was delighted when I shared the news during our evening call. "Vincent Morrison built his career on intimidating people who couldn't fight back," she said with satisfaction. "He never learned how to win cases based on actual merit, so when faced with a solid opponent, he resorted to cheating. That tells us everything we need to know about the strength of my family's position." The scandal surrounding Morrison's tactics created an opportunity for settlement negotiations, but this time from a position of strength rather than desperation. The Blackwood family's new attorney, brought in to replace the disgraced Morrison, approached David with a significantly different tone. Rather than threats and intimidation, the conversation centered on finding a resolution that would minimize further embarrassment for all parties involved. Margaret visited me again during this crucial period, bringing updates on the family dynamics that Eleanor was too diplomatic to share directly. "Richard and Patricia are barely speaking to each other," she reported with barely concealed amusement. "He blames her for alienating Eleanor with her treatment of you, while she insists this whole situation is his fault for not managing his mother better." the internal family conflicts were apparently affecting their business relationships as well. Several hotel investors had quietly distanced themselves from the Blackwood chain after learning about the legal battle, concerned about the negative publicity and ethical questions surrounding the family's treatment of Eleanor and me. Marcus had been forced to step down from several prominent business organizations to avoid further embarrassment. Victoria's legal career had suffered the most dramatic impact. The Bar Association's investigation into Morrison's tactics had revealed her involvement in planning some of the more questionable strategies, leading to an ethics review that threatened her professional license. Several law firms that had been considering her for partnership positions had withdrawn their offers, leaving her scrambling to rebuild her reputation. The pressure was clearly taking its toll on the family's unity, according to Eleanor's careful observations. "They're beginning to turn on each other," she confided during one of our calls. "Richard is furious with Victoria for involving Morrison in the first place, while Patricia blames Marcus for not being more persuasive during their initial settlement attempts. It's exactly what I expected would happen once their greed was exposed to public scrutiny." The formal settlement negotiations began in early March, with both sides meeting in David's conference room overlooking the Connecticut River. The Blackwood family's new attorney, James Harrison, was a respected estate specialist known for his professionalism and ethical approach to difficult cases. His presence signaled that the family had finally accepted the need for a reasonable resolution rather than continued warfare. Richard, Patricia, Marcus, and Victoria attended the meeting, their usual confidence replaced by resigned exhaustion. Months of legal stress, business complications, and public scrutiny had clearly worn them down. They looked older than when I had last seen them, their faces bearing the weight of a battle they were finally ready to admit they couldn't win. Harrison opened the negotiations by acknowledging the strength of Eleanor's will and my legal position, a significant departure from Morrison's previous strategy of attacking every aspect of the inheritance. My clients recognized that Mrs. Blackwood made her decision with full legal authority and sound reasoning. He began. "Our goal today is to find a resolution that honors her wishes, while addressing some practical concerns about family relationships and business continuity." The family's final settlement offer was both generous and telling in what it revealed about their true assessment of the case. They proposed that I accept 75% of Eleanor's personal estate, while they would retain 25% plus continued control of the hotel business operations. Additionally, they would establish a substantial trust fund for the children's education and future needs, managed jointly by Eleanor and me. David and I had discussed this possibility extensively, and I had already decided that some compromise might be worth considering if it meant ending the bitter conflict that was tearing the family apart. Eleanor's primary goal had been to ensure her values were preserved and continued, and that could be achieved even with a slightly reduced inheritance if it came with family peace. But Eleanor herself surprised everyone by rejecting the settlement offer outright when David presented it to her for consideration. "Absolutely not," she declared firmly during our conference call. "Jessica has endured months of harassment and intimidation for doing nothing more than caring for this family with genuine love. She deserves every penny I left her, and I won't allow my children to profit from their shameful behavior." Her unwavering support strengthened my resolve to see the legal process through to its conclusion, rather than accepting a compromise that would essentially reward the family's attempts to overturn her wishes. If Eleanor was willing to stand firm despite the stress and family discord, then I could find the courage to do the same. The formal probate hearing was scheduled for late April, giving both sides time to prepare their final arguments and witness testimony. David was confident in our position, but he warned me that courtroom proceedings could be emotionally challenging, as the family's attorneys would likely attempt to portray me as a calculating opportunist who had manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman. Eleanor insisted on testifying on her own behalf, despite David's concerns about subjecting an 82-year-old woman to aggressive cross-examination. "I've been making important decisions for 60 years, she declared when David suggested she submit written testimony instead. "I'm perfectly capable of explaining my reasoning to a judge, and I want to look Richard in the eye when I do it." The weeks leading up to the hearing were filled with intensive preparation, as David and I reviewed every aspect of my relationship with the Blackwood family. We practiced potential questions about my motivations, my interactions with Eleanor, and my plans for the inheritance. The preparation was exhausting, but it also helped me understand how much I had grown during my 3 years with the family. Margaret offered to testify about Eleanor's mental sharpness and her long-standing concerns about her family's behavior. Several of the estate's longtime employees also volunteered to speak about the family dynamics they had observed, including Eleanor's gardener Frank, who had witnessed years of my interactions with both Eleanor and the children. The night before the hearing, Eleanor called to offer final words of encouragement. "Tomorrow, the truth will finally be heard in full," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that choosing you as my heir was the best decision I've made in years. You've already proven yourself worthy of this trust, simply by refusing to be intimidated into abandoning it." The courthouse was packed with family members, business associates, and curious observers who had followed the case through local media coverage. The Blackwood family sat on one side of the courtroom, their faces grim with resignation, while Eleanor and I occupied the other side with our legal team and supporters. Judge Patricia Hoffman, a respected jurist with decades of experience in estate matters, called the hearing to order with a stern warning about courtroom decorum. She had clearly reviewed the case file extensively and seemed unimpressed by the family's attempts to characterize the proceedings as anything other than a straightforward probate matter. Harrison's opening statement was notably restrained compared to Morrison's earlier aggressive approach. He focused on the unusual nature of leaving such a substantial estate to someone outside the family, arguing that while Eleanor had the legal right to make such a decision, it represented a departure from reasonable expectations that warranted judicial scrutiny. David's response was devastating in its simplicity. He presented the case as a straightforward matter of an elderly woman rewarding loyalty and kindness while expressing disappointment in her family's values. Mrs. Blackwood didn't disinherit her family because of outside influence, he argued. She disinherited them because of their own behavior, which she observed firsthand for years. Eleanor's testimony was the emotional centerpiece of the hearing. Despite her advanced age, she spoke with clarity and conviction about her decision to leave her estate to me. She detailed specific instances of the family's dismissive treatment of me, their apparent sense of entitlement to her wealth, and their failure to demonstrate the values she had tried to instill in them throughout their lives. When Harrison attempted to suggest that her decision represented diminished mental capacity, Eleanor's response was swift and sharp. "Young man, I built a multi-million-dollar business empire over 60 years of marriage. I think I'm qualified to recognize genuine character when I see it, and I saw it in Jessica every single day for 3 years." Her testimony about the family's behavior was particularly damaging to their case. She recounted Patricia's cruel comments about service staff, Richard's attempts to gain control of her finances, and Marcus and Victoria's obvious calculation of their inheritance prospects. "They treated Jessica like she was invisible while she brought joy and stability to our household," Eleanor stated firmly. "That told me everything I needed to know about their character." My own testimony focused on my genuine affection for Eleanor and the children, my surprise at learning about the inheritance, and my commitment to using the resources to help others as she had intended. When Harrison tried to suggest that I had deliberately cultivated Eleanor's favor for financial gain, I was able to point to my consistent financial support of my own mother, as evidence that my motivations were genuine rather than calculating. The children's former teachers, Eleanor's doctors, and longtime family employees all testified about my character and Eleanor's mental acuity. Their consistent testimony painted a picture of a devoted caregiver who had earned an elderly woman's trust through years of genuine kindness, while also confirming that Eleanor remained sharp and decisive until the very end. The family's testimony was notably weak, focusing more on their expectations of inheritance than on any evidence of wrongdoing on my part. Richard's attempt to portray himself as a devoted son fell flat when David presented evidence of his limited visits to Eleanor and his business-focused conversations during those rare encounters. Judge Hoffman's decision, delivered after a brief recess, was unequivocal in upholding Eleanor's will. This court finds no evidence of undue influence, mental incapacity, or any other grounds for overturning Mrs. Blackwood's testamentary decisions. she declared. "The evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Blackwood made her choices based on years of observation and with full understanding of their implications." The judge's additional comments were particularly satisfying. It appears that Mrs. Blackwood recognized qualities in Miss Martinez that she found lacking in her own family members. While this may be disappointing to the family, it does not constitute grounds for judicial interference with her clearly expressed wishes. Eleanor smiled with quiet satisfaction as the judge's ruling was announced, while the Blackwood family sat in stunned silence. After months of legal warfare, the battle was finally over, and Eleanor's faith in both the legal system and my character had been completely vindicated. The immediate aftermath of the court decision brought a strange mix of relief, excitement, and overwhelming responsibility. As we left the courthouse, Eleanor took my arm and whispered, "Now the real work begins, dear. We have a foundation to build and a legacy to establish." Within weeks, I was working with financial advisors and attorneys to establish the Harold and Martha Blackwood Foundation, dedicated to providing educational opportunities and support services for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Eleanor insisted on being actively involved in the planning, her energy and enthusiasm renewed by our legal victory. The children's reunion with me was everything I had hoped for during the long months of separation. They had grown and changed during our time apart, but their affection remained constant, and they quickly readjusted to having me back in their daily lives. The family's defeat in court had apparently convinced them to accept my permanent presence, rather than risk further legal complications. Richard and Patricia maintained a cold but civil relationship with me, clearly understanding that their financial security now depended partly on my goodwill. Marcus and Victoria were notably absent from most family gatherings, apparently focusing on rebuilding their damaged careers and reputations away from the estate. 6 months after the court decision, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the people who truly loved her. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched through her quiet generosity and principled leadership. The children and I mourned together, finding comfort in our shared memories of the woman who had brought us together. As I stood in the garden where Eleanor had first welcomed me 3 years earlier, watching Sophie, Sam, and Emma play among the flowers she had tended with such care, I understood completely why she had entrusted me with her legacy. The inheritance wasn't just about money or property. It was about preserving the values of kindness, generosity, and genuine care for others that she and Charles had embodied throughout their lives. The foundation we established in her honor has already helped dozens of young people pursue educational opportunities they couldn't have afforded otherwise. Every scholarship awarded, every mentoring program launched, and every life changed represents Eleanor's continued influence on the world, extending far beyond the family that failed to appreciate her wisdom. Looking back on that shocking evening when Eleanor announced her will at the family reunion, I realized that she gave me something far more valuable than financial security. She gave me the confidence to stand up for what's right, the resources to help others achieve their dreams, and the understanding that true family is defined by love and respect rather than blood relations. The children still call me their nanny, but now they also call me family, and that means more to me than any inheritance ever could. Eleanor's greatest gift wasn't the money she left me. It was the example she set of how to live with integrity and use whatever resources you have to make the world a better place for others. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.